Chapter 15. Elizabeth receives a letter. Elizabeth woke the next morning to the same thoughts. It was impossible to fix her mind on anything else, so she decided soon after breakfast to give herself air and exercise. She was going directly towards her favorite part of the park when she remembered that Mr. Darcy sometimes came there, and she turned up the narrow road outside Rosings. After a little time she caught sight of a gentleman within the park. She had turned away, but when she heard a voice calling her, though it was Mr. Darcy's, she moved towards the gate. He, too, had reached it by this time. Holding out the letter, he said with a look of proud calm, "Will you do me the honor of reading this?" Then he turned and was soon out of sight. Elizabeth opened the letter and saw 2 sheets, completely covered in handwriting. The letter had been written at Rosings at 8 o'clock in the morning and read as follows: "Do not be troubled, madam, on receiving this letter. I write without any intention of upsetting you or wounding my own self-respect by mentioning unnecessarily what passed between us last night. But my character demands this to be written and read. You must therefore pardon the freedom with which I ask your attention. You will, I know, give it unwillingly, but I must request it as a matter of justice. Last night you charged me with 2 offenses of a very different kind. The first was that I had separated Mr. Bingley from your sister, and the other that I had ruined the hopes of Mr. Wickham. I must now explain these matters. I had not been in Hertfordshire for long before I saw that Bingley preferred your older sister to any other young woman there. I did not take this seriously, because I had often seen him in love before. But at the ball at Netherfields, while I had the honor of dancing with you, I first realized, through Sir William Lucas's accidental information, that Bingley's attentions to your sister had caused a general expectation that they would be married. From that moment I watched my friend carefully, and saw that his attraction to Miss Bennet was beyond what I had ever seen in him before. I also watched your sister. Her look and manner were open, cheerful, and pleasing as ever, but I saw no sign of strong feeling. If you have not been mistaken here, I must have been deceived. Your greater knowledge of your sister makes it probable that you were right. My objections to the marriage were not only those which I mentioned last night in my own case. There were others. The inferiority of your mother's family, though a problem, was nothing compared with the total lack of good manners so frequently shown by herself, by your 3 younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. Pardon me, it pains me to offend you. Let it be of comfort to you that the behavior of yourself and your older sister has been so honorably free from such faults. The anxiety of Bingley's sisters had been excited as much as my own. The action that followed is known to you, but I do not suppose that the marriage would have been prevented if I had not persuaded Bingley that your sister did not care for him. He believed me when I told him that he had deceived himself. I cannot blame myself for having done this. There is only one point on which I feel some discomfort, and that is that I purposely deceived him by hiding from him the fact that your sister's being in town. With regard to that other charge of having done harm to Mr. Wickham, I can only defend myself by telling the whole story. Mr. Wickham was the son of my father's manager, a respectable man. My father had the son well educated, and, hoping that the church would be his profession, intended to provide for him in it. I, as a young man of about the same age, very soon realized that he had a bad character, a fact which he carefully hid from my father. Before he died, my father asked me to encourage his development, and if he joined the church, to let him have a valuable family living. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Wickham wrote to say that he had decided against becoming a minister. He wished instead to study law and demanded money to help him. I willingly gave him this, knowing that he was not fit for the church, and he then in return gave up all claim to any appointment in it. Later, the position became free, and having neglected his studies of the law and lived a life of laziness, he demanded it, and I refused. Last summer, he again most painfully forced himself on my notice. I must now mention a family matter that I would myself wish to forget, and which only present necessity causes me to make known to you. I feel quite confident of your ability to keep my secret. My sister, who is 10 years younger than I am, had just left school and was placed in the care of a lady in Ramsgate. My trust in this woman was not well judged. She allowed Wickham, whom she knew, to make love to my sister, who agreed to run away with him. I went down to see her just before the intended flight. Georgiana was ashamed and told me everything. You may imagine what I felt and how I acted. Wickham's chief object was, without doubt, my sister's fortune, which is £30,000, but I cannot help supposing that he also hoped to annoy me. Colonel Fitzwilliam will bear witness to the truth of everything that I have written here. I shall try to find some opportunity of putting this letter into your hands during the morning. Sincerely, Fitzwilliam Darcy. As Elizabeth eagerly read the letter, she experienced every kind of feeling. She began with a strong prejudice against whatever it might contain, and wished to disbelieve completely all the explanations that it put forward. She repeatedly told herself, "This must be false, this cannot be." When she had gone through the whole document, she put it away, promising herself that she would never look at it again. But she could not do that. In half a minute, the letter was unfolded again. She read and reread with the closest attention the details about Wickham. Of the two men concerned, one was free from blame, the other worthless. But how to decide between them? She tried to remember some example of goodness on Wickham's side. She could find none. He had pleased her by his appearance, his voice, and his manner, but she knew nothing about his real character. The story of his intentions regarding Miss Darcy received some support from her conversation with Colonel Fitzwilliam only the morning before, and according to Darcy, the Colonel would support every detail of this story. She perfectly remembered everything that had passed in conversation between Wickham and herself during the first evening at Mr. Phillips. Many of his expressions were still fresh in her memory. She was now struck with the bad taste of such remarks made to a stranger, and was surprised that it had escaped her notice before. She saw the lack of good breeding in the way in which he had put himself forward. She remembered that he had claimed to have no fear of seeing Mr. Darcy, but he had avoided the Netherfield ball the very next week. She remembered also that until the Netherfield family had left the area, he had told his story to no one but herself, but after their removal, he had discussed it freely, although he had told her that respect for the father would always prevent him from making public the injustice that was done to him by the son. She became completely ashamed of herself. She felt that she had been blind, prejudiced, unreasonable. She read again the part of the letter about Jane, and was forced to admit to herself the justice of Darcy's description of her sister. She knew that Jane's feelings, though strong, were usually well hidden. When she came to the part in which her family were mentioned, it was so wounding to her pride, but still so just in the blame that they expressed. Her sense of shame was severe. The praise of herself and her sister was not unfelt, but it could not comfort her, and when she considered that Jane's disappointment had in fact been the work of her nearest relations, she fell in lower spirits than she had ever been before. She soon began to know much of the letter by heart. She studied every sentence, and her feelings towards its writer were at times widely different. When she remembered the manner in which he had addressed her, she was still full of anger, but when she considered how unfairly she had misjudged him, her anger was turned against herself, and his disappointed feelings became the object of pity. She could feel grateful for his attachment and could respect his general character, but she could not approve of him, or be sorry about her refusal, or feel the slightest desire ever to see him again. In her own past behavior there was a continual cause for annoyance, and in the faults of her family a subject of even heavier sorrow. They would never be put right. Her father, happy to laugh at them, would never trouble himself to control the wild foolishness of his youngest daughters. And her mother, with manners so far from perfect herself, was completely unconscious of the evil. Elizabeth had frequently united with Jane in an attempt to control the silliness of Kitty and Lydia, but while they were encouraged by the mother's fond carelessness, what chance could there be of improvement? Kitty, weak-spirited, nervous, and completely under Lydia's influence, had always been offended by their advice, and Lydia, careless and determined to have her own way, would hardly give them a hearing. They were foolish, lazy, and empty-headed. While there was an officer in Meryton, they would be trying to attract him. And while Meryton was within walking distance of Longbourn, they would be going there forever. Anxiety for Jane was another cause of concern, and Mr. Darcy's explanation, by bringing back all her former good opinion of Bingley, increased the sense of what Jane had lost. It may easily be believed that the events of the last 2 days had such an effect on Elizabeth's naturally happy spirits that she found it almost impossible to appear even reasonably cheerful. It was with a ready heart that she watched her visit in Hunsford come to an end in the next week. Mr. Darcy had, she knew, left shortly after handing her the letter. At last, the boxes were packed and the goodbyes over, not without a long speech from Mr. Collins. The carriage drove off towards London, where Jane was to join the party for home. "Oh," cried Maria after a few minutes' silence, "it seems only a day or two since we first came, but so many things have happened." "A great many," said her companion sadly. "We had dinner 9 times at Rosings, besides drinking tea there twice. How much I shall have to tell!" Elizabeth privately added, "And how much I shall have to hide."